what are the things that I need to do to be a good airman, to be a good citizen in the airspace, knowing that I'm not only sharing that with other people flying drones, but I'm potentially sharing the airspace with people that are flying EMS helicopters or law enforcement helicopters.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 134. What do you need to know to fly your commercial drone? That's the question we posed to Brian Wynne, President and CEO of the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. AUVSI is the world's largest nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of unmanned systems and robotics. It represents more than 7,000 members from more than 60 countries involved in the fields of government, industry, and academia. Prior to joining AUVSI in January of 2015, Brian was the president and CEO of the Electric Drive Transportation Association. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Brian talks about the mission of AUVSI and what commercial drone operators need to know to fly their drones legally and safely. Now, before we hear from Brian, I want to thank those of you who have been supporting my funding campaign on Patreon. For as little as $1 per month, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to patreon.com/drone radio show to join the team. And now let's learn what we need to know to fly our drone safely. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Brian to introduce himself.
Brian Wynne, President and CEO of the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. That means I'm the head of the complaints department here. It's a fairly long-standing organization, as you're well aware, of 45 years serving the unmanned systems and robotics community. And I consider myself to be the chief advocate here. So I have the great pleasure to serve the board, the members, and a staff of about 35.
For those that may not be familiar with your organization, can you tell us about AUVSI?
The easiest way to think about it is the four areas that we constantly measure ourselves on, and those are advocacy, education, market growth, and member service. So a lot of the different activities that we're involved in actually cover multiple categories. You know, if you just take the thing that we're probably best known for with our conference and exposition called Exponential, we have the administrator from the FAA there every year. We generally have people from the Pentagon, other policymakers, et cetera, a lot of media folks. So we kind of do a good job covering the advocacy business or advocacy objectives there. Obviously, education is a big part of what goes on in Exponential. And then market growth, that's really what's going on. We're kind of convening a market there, and a lot of folks that want to use this technology come to find solution providers. And then serving our members. We're always expanding the membership and serving them. That's sort of the underpinning to the other three things that we do. We do all of those things for our member companies, members, and community at large.
So today I'd like to focus on one of those pillars, the education area, primarily the Know Before You Fly program. Can you tell us about the program and how it got started?
It was launched just as I arrived on the scene here in January of 2015. I give the credit to initiating the program to my predecessor, Michael Toscano, who was here at AUVSI for many years. And I think it came out of a broad recognition that at that particular time, and really even today, this technology, which is very accessible to pretty much anybody that can find their way into an electronics store, are now flying an aircraft in the airspace and therefore subject to the rules that airmen have to follow to make certain that we're doing that in a way that's safe and responsible. That was the original idea. I don't think that idea has changed a great deal. What has changed is that we had great founding partners, which I know you're talking to in the Academy of Model Aeronautics, as well as the FAA. And then 100 plus other organizations have stepped forward to support those efforts to get that word out through their channels of communication. So that's really been, I think, the original idea was, let's get the word out here that you want to be doing this for fun. That's great. Just do so in a way that's safe and responsible. And here's exactly what you need to know before you go fly. And then let's get that information out right up to the point of putting it right in the boxes themselves, so that when someone opens the box and starts figuring out how they go about having fun or maybe even setting up a business with this technology, they have everything that they need right there. And in some instances, links to additional information.
What constitutes a commercial operator?
That's pretty simple from, I think, a regulatory standpoint. If you're charging for services, then you're a commercial operator.
And that includes anyone that sets up a full-time business, as well as the person that purchased a drone for fun, but is thinking about making some money on the side.
Whether it's taking pictures for a real estate agent that's trying to sell your house, or the actual, if you're a real estate agent, you're thinking, well, this is not really how I make my money. I make my money when I sell a house. No, it's connected to that particular transaction. And so that's a commercial operation. And these are not new concepts. If you're holding out services, and I had to learn all these things when I got my commercial rating pretty recently, you have to be careful. You're subject to different laws. And of course, when we got started with Know Before You Fly, we didn't have Part 107. So, it was even more important to explain to people, hey, this is what a commercial operation is. If you're going to do this, then you're subject to different rules than the folks that are flying under, say, a community-based program like AMA has.
You mentioned the goal is to get the Know Before You Fly information into the hands of users at the point of purchase. Is that happening?
Whose information is being used might be different from manufacturer to manufacturer. But I think the manufacturers have quickly begun to understand that this isn't going to be a sustainable business if people are misusing the technology. And not only is it not going to be a sustainable business, but it might put others at risk, and we don't want that. So they're either using Know Before You Fly information, which they are welcome to do, and we are encouraging them to do, or they're using their own materials that I'm sure essentially say the same things.
Are you aware of any studies or stats of how well people are following the rules? Are there certain provisions that users adopt quickly and others that are more of a challenge that maybe require more education?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is clearly yes. Airspace, of course, is a concept that any Part 61 certificated pilot gets drilled into him pretty early. You can take off in the airplane from this kind of an airport, it's subject to these kinds of rules and, et cetera, et cetera. That can be quite consequential if you do that the wrong way, particularly in a place like Washington, D.C., which, not unlike some of the other places, but I think particularly prominent here are some of the rules, particularly since 9/11, that you don't want to be afoul of. If you're not in that mindset, which, again, we're put into immediately as airmen, then you have to learn how to read a sectional map, or you need to have some kind of a tool available, whether it's with your iPad or your iPhone or whatever your smart device is, that tells you here's where you are and here's what you can do. And so we now have apps for that, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the long and the short is that this word has essentially gotten out. We've made the information more accessible to folks and hopefully encourage them to get better trained. Whether I have ambitions to be a commercial operator or not, the information that one needs to know, the knowledge that one needs to know as a Part 107 operator is available to anybody on the FAA website. And of course, there are other training programs that are available as well. So to me, this is something to be encouraged. I'm hoping that the kind of people that are intrigued by this and enjoy flying drones want to become better operators, whether they're flying for money or not. And so we're hoping to encourage that through all of the educational means that we've got, including Know Before You Fly.
My understanding is that Part 107 has a lot of the Know Before You Fly concepts built into its training or requirements already. Am I correct in that assessment?
You are, and it gives me the opportunity to point out to folks, in case they're wondering, there's really only two ways you're allowed to fly an aircraft in the airspace, in any sort of controlled airspace. If you're out in uncontrolled airspace, then it doesn't matter. But it's always a good idea, one way or the other, if you're flying an aircraft, to give way to manned aircraft. And you could be in uncontrolled airspace and encounter a manned aircraft, whether it's a helicopter or maybe an aerial applicator or something like that. But one way or the other, you're either going to fly under Part 107 or you're going to fly under Part 101, which is essentially the community-based rules. There are no other alternatives to that. You are flying an aircraft, you're subject to either Part 101 or Part 107. And they're remarkably similar. 107 is a higher standard because if you're going to fly for money, you have to be certificated. So, but it's pretty well common sense and well understood. Under 400 feet, visual line of sight, daytime operations only, stay away from people, stay away from airports. And I think as long as people are applying good common sense and doing so with a duty of care, then we don't really run into trouble too often.
We always hear about the potential of people misusing their drones or flying where they're not supposed to be. Do you have a sense of the magnitude of this issue?
We're in the process of developing those approaches. Peggy Gilligan, who was head of safety over at the FAA, who recently retired, is famous for launching the commercial aviation safety team. And that was launched, I want to say about 20 years ago. Don't hold me to that. But, there were some bad things that were happening. There were a couple of unfortunate incidents and fatalities. And she gathered the commercial aviation community together and said, we need to have a data-driven approach to safety, and it can't just be the FAA, trying to, in a heavy-handed way, force industry to do the right thing. And they have had remarkable results by capturing information of all kinds, which is easier to do in the commercial aviation realm, but required everyone to contribute and to participate. And they have been very successful. And of course, we enjoy much higher safety rates today than we did at that particular stage in the aviation community development. With Peggy's help, we have launched, in conjunction with the FAA industry and FAA, have launched the UAS safety team, which I'm privileged to be on the executive committee for. And we are in the process of doing precisely what you just asked, which is to collect that data, which frankly is a little bit fragmented and hard to find right now, but figure out ways of what are the data sets we want to collect, how do we anonymize that so that we can see where the safety issues are and then train to those safety issues so that we have better pilots and better results. I don't think there have been a lot of incidents out there. When there are incidents with a UAS, it's a pretty big deal, as it generally is with any new technology. But one way or the other, we want to not wait until we've got big problems. We want to actually get out ahead of it and encourage high levels of professionalism and attention to detail and safety in particular from the very beginning. So that's that effort underway. But candidly, the answer to your question is we don't have good data right now. We are struggling mightily to figure out as quickly as we can how to collect that data so that we can benefit from it.
For new commercial drone operators, what would be the best advice to make sure they get off to a good start in this industry?
I would start with, and I'm really pretty biased here as a 25-year pilot, I would start with understanding first and foremost that this is not a toy. It's an aircraft, and that makes me an airman. And if I'm going to fly an aircraft in the airspace, that makes me an airman. What does that mean? What are the principles of airmanship? It's kind of like, what are the principles of seamanship? I have to learn how to navigate. I have to learn how to aviate. I have to learn how to communicate. Those are the fun things that we all talk about. This is not complicated stuff. And be a good citizen, right? Find out through Know Before You Fly. That's just one of a number of threads that you can pull, but it's a great place to start. What are the things that I need to do to be a good airman, to be a good citizen in the airspace, knowing that I'm not only sharing that with other people flying drones, but I'm potentially sharing the airspace with people that are flying EMS helicopters or law enforcement helicopters below to the ground, et cetera, et cetera. Welcome to the community. Be a good citizen. I think that's the key thing. And use the FAA website, use the Know Before You Fly website. And as we get further along with UAST, once we've defined what those things are, I'm sure there will be opportunities for you to opt in to providing data that would be anonymized, as we do in the GA community, as we do in the commercial aviation community, so that if something happens that we're not best pleased with, we've got good data on it. We can figure out how to train to that issue.
The Know Before You Fly program and Part 107 training provide the education, But what about the actual flying experience? Is there any thought to ensure that commercial drone operators are getting the right practical experience to fly safely?
That's a great question. We're in the process of gathering together the remote pilots community. We've launched a council inside of AUVSI. We've been having those meetings in locations around the country since January, February timeframe. And first and foremost, trying to create a sense of community with remote pilots so they can learn from each other. That's what we do as aviators. We learn from each other and have that sense of pride and professionalism that, I'm part of this. And I want to make sure that we do it right, knowing that if we don't do it right, our privileges are going to be curtailed. So there's always that in the background for all pilots, including remote pilots. One of the topics that keeps coming up is what is an appropriate level of training and where do we go to get that training? Some of the people that show up at our Remote Pilots Council meetings are 7,000-hour ATPs, airline transport pilots, or former military jet jockeys. They're really experienced aviators. Some of them are trying to understand what this is all about. All of these folks are welcome. So the question becomes, how do we learn from one another? There's all kinds of different environments where you can go and learn how to do more challenging things. But one of the things that we've recognized is that there needs to be a level of standard training, or maybe multiple levels of training. If I'm a trained pilot and I'm holding out services to, say, a utility company, they want me to inspect their substations, I need to be able to tell them that I'm trained to a certain level that they can appreciate and helps them, and connects also at some point up to insurance rates and things like that. Again, these are all approaches that that are longstanding in the aviation world. We're in the process of figuring out how can we foster that to happen a little bit quicker at AUVSI, and there's a broad recognition that we need this.
What's happening at the federal level that we need to be aware of?
The most active effort right now, which I think is extremely significant, is the Remote Identification ARC, or Aviation Rulemaking Committee, that's underway, and I forget exactly when it will wrap up its work. But there's a broad recognition now that flying anonymously is creating some challenges for people that are on the ground and need to be able to tell, is that an authorized flight or is that some random person that doesn't belong anywhere near a substation or a nuclear power plant or some other kind of critical facility. So remote identification has been moved up to the head of the list of things that we're working on to try and figure out how to agree on an approach to remote identification, not only the technology, but how it would be done and how it would be available to folks that need to be able to determine that. And that really flowed out of an effort from where we thought we were pretty close, which was to be able to get a rule on flying over people. And the long and the short was that rulemaking was withdrawn in favor of getting this piece done first. Once we have remote identification, then we can move forward with flights over people. That's not to say that you can't get a waiver under Part 107 to fly over people today. But I think increasingly what's happening in some municipal areas is they're just putting up no drone zones, which of course is not a good approach, particularly if you talk to the public safety people that want to use drones. They just need to be able to tell what's an authorized operation versus someone that is not authorized to be in a particular place. So we're kind of at that stage right now where we're trying to drill down and get that part figured out, and I think we're going to do that pretty quickly.
Any new forecasts of the industry that you can share with us?
Well, forecasting is really challenging. We do have forecast numbers that were originally done in 2012 and then released in early 2013. And what we're trying to figure out is, what are the metrics that we can use to answer that question? There is a lot of value that gets unleashed under Part 107 just inspecting vertical infrastructure, for example. So we're looking at ways of keeping track, whether it's the number of Part 107 certificates being issued and how do we communicate with those folks through the Remote Pilots Council to see how is that going, how fast is it, is their business ramping up. Right now, I think we're in that awkward place of coming up on the first anniversary of Part 107. And, we're still out there waiting weeks on end for approvals to fly in a particular airspace, whether it's a Class D or Class C airspace. So all of those things eventually are going to get automated. That process has begun now. AUVSI has been working very hard with Congress to get FAA greater resources to automate these things, for example. Same thing with waivers. We know pretty much at this stage in the game what it takes to get a waiver to fly at night. We'd like to see that be made a rule, as a matter of fact, so that you're not prohibited from doing that, requiring a waiver, but you can do it under these particular circumstances. We're at that stage now where things are going to start to accelerate. It'll probably be another year before we start seeing that exponential growth that we like to talk about. But I think we're definitely on the path, barring some other regulatory surprise or regulatory slowdown like we saw, for example, the withdrawal of the flight over people rule. So we have to watch out for that. At the same time, I think all of the signs are that the FAA is leaning in hard. They're leaning in steeply to try and get this done as fast as possible and not create barriers to people flying and making a good living with the technology.
Is there anything that we missed that we should talk about?
Just that at some point when the remote ID piece comes out, we're all going to have to kind of join hands here and agree that flying anonymously is not a good thing. It's going to give the general public much greater confidence that drones are providing good services and creating benefits for them and society and the economy, et cetera. If law enforcement, for example, of our public safety people are not only adopting the technology, but supporting others to adopt it. I think the concept that someone with nefarious intent could use this technology when it's flying around and there's no way to tell who's flying it makes it somewhat challenging for the rest of us. So I was one of the first ones to stand up with the administrator, with Secretary Fox, the former Secretary of Transportation, to say we need to register our drones. That has been struck down by the courts for those that are flying for fun and for hobby. I think that's going to be a challenge over time, and I think we're on path to get that resolved from a legislative perspective. And I think, hopefully folks understand why we're doing it that way. It's a new technology. Not everybody is completely enamored of the idea of drones flying around. So being good citizens, I think, is really important. Being mindful of the fact that if you're doing something that no one knows you're the one doing it, but it might be causing some concern, that could be a problem. So that also comes in the realm of being safe and responsible. Safe, responsible, and considerate might be the thing that we add to the end of that. So being willing to register your drone, squawk whatever needs to be squawked so that others that need to know who you are can see where you're flying appropriately. I think that's all part of the being accountable, being a good citizen, being a good airman.
And for my last question, Brian, where do you see the industry going from here? And how should commercial drone operators prepare for that future?
I think I'm quoting Bill Gates, who said that we have a tendency to overestimate what we can do in 2 years, but underestimate what we can do in 10. If you think about the fact that we've just had the 10-year anniversary of the iPhone, right? And now nobody can live without some kind of smart device. And just in aviation alone, what we do in the aircraft with iPads, it just boggles the mind. We're still on the ramp on this thing. We're still getting, in some ways, just getting to the starting line. So from my standpoint, the most important thing here is to pay attention to the fact that there are enormous industries, frankly, segments of the U.S. economy that really, really, really need to utilize this technology. And as long as we go about it the right way, we execute things properly, and we don't create headwinds for ourselves, we're going to get to that level of growth. And literally, I think we'll look back from 10 years hence, or 9 years hence, back on the introduction of Part 107 and say, gee, that was a little slow to get started, but man, was that a ramp that we saw. And now look at what we're doing with the technology. So I think we're at that interesting moment in time. If we execute this technology the right way, we will get to those exponential ramps. And the technology will create tremendous benefits, not only economic benefits, but many societal benefits as well. So very excited about it, but we're not going to take a day off for a while.
That's it for episode 134 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed listening to Brian Wynne of AUVSI. I want to thank Brian for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, or want to connect with Brian, check out the website at auvsi.org. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1 per month, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to patreon.com/Drone Radio Show. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.